Welcome to Using Humor for Powerful Presentations with John Kinde. On this tape, I talk about how humor works, how to develop humor using the shopping list technique, and how to use spontaneous humor.
I'm going to start this session out with some humor and then explain later how it was constructed. I'm going to do a vignette that was used in a contest. I'm going to do a vignette which I've also used in comedy clubs. And so I'll just do it. You can listen to it, take any notes if you wish, and then I'll go back later on and I'll talk about the actual construction technique and how you develop your own humor. Well, as you know, I'm a magician. And of course, sometimes magicians like to do mind reading. And I'm going to read the mind of everyone in the room at the same time. Now, I know that sounds rather difficult, but what I'm going to do is narrow your thinking down into the same general area, and then I'll be able to read everyone's mind at the same time. Now, if you just listen to me for just a second, I'll give you some areas to perhaps narrow your thinking, and then I'll read your mind. What is a natural human drive that gives us great pleasure and is essential to the survival of the human race? What does a honeymooning couple do once they get away from their friends and relatives? What do teenagers do at a drive-in movie? I don't mean watch the movie. Many people light up a cigarette when this activity is over with. And people enjoy it into their 70s and 80s. Now, if everyone would concentrate. Yes, everyone is thinking of eating. Oh, except for Diane. She's thinking of sex. But everybody else in the room is thinking of eating. And it's because we love to eat, don't we? And share recipes and go to dinner with friends. We love that. But sex is sort of a taboo subject in our culture, and we don't think about it and talk about it that much. But I want you to use your imaginations. I'm going to ask you, what if sex were clean and food were dirty? Did you hear what happened to Mary last night? She brought a man home from the local coffee shop and he ate her whole apple pie. Well, I think she probably asked for it. Have you ever seen her pies? That golden tan crust and those fancy fluted edges, and she's always putting on those lattice tops, the kind you can see right through. Her fruit was in plain sight. And you won't believe this. She put whipped cream on it. Oh, but she's had a bad marriage. Rumor has it that her husband is a closet cook. And she walked in on him one night in the kitchen, and all he could say was, "I am not a cook." But what I'm concerned with is what's happening to our society. There's a beach near here up in San Luis Obispo. It's called Pirates Cove Beach. It's one of those food beaches. People walking around eating in public as though it were perfectly natural. And the houses of ill repute are everywhere. I drove by one. There's one just down the street here. It says, "Billions and billions sold." People just drop in for a meaningless quickie. Eating just isn't special anymore. In fact, I went by one of those places. I'll have to admit I was in a hurry. And the service is fast. And I went to one of those places where I could have it my way. And they gave me a little paper bag, and I was on my way to the health club, and I rushed in, and I wasn't paying attention. I was in such a hurry, I accidentally walked into the vegetarians' locker room. And they screamed when they saw my Whopper. But the trends, the supermarkets, you see people pushing out cartfuls of food. Nothing more obscene than that. That's why they call them groceries, and put them in plain brown wrappers. I found a special food that I want to share with you. In fact, it was in the adult food section. Is Whiskas cat food? Now, you know, cat food has always been one of those forbidden foods. I've always wanted to try it. But the problem has always been the way it looks, the way it smells. Cat food. But there's a new product on the market. Cat Food Helper. It contains everything you need to make cat food a delightful taste treat. It contains Pine Sol disinfectant spray, which not only disinfects, but it deodorizes. It actually smells good. It also contains Step Saver carpet cleaner. Did you know that carpet cleaner looks just like whipped cream? And it's only half the cost. And look, it's just another non-dairy topping. Now I'd like to offer everyone a sample, but I don't have enough to go around.
Oh my God.
You'll just have to take my word for it. Absolutely indescribable. Now, I don't want you to be ill thinking that I just ate cat food, because I didn't. You see, I took a can of cat food and I removed the label and I put the label on a can of dog food. Cat food tastes terrible. That was just a little bit of a sample there, and I'll come back to that and tell you about how I constructed that and the process of doing that. How many people here would like to be better at using humor than they are right now? And I bet almost everybody in the room. Me too. I keep working on that all the time. And some people think, oh, but I can't be funny. And I won't ask for a show of hands there, but some people think that in order to be funny, you've got to be born that way. You've got to be the class clown. You've got to be naturally funny. And I don't believe that, because I was never the class clown. In fact, when people see me today on the streets, they never would believe I was funny. I've had people that will sit next to me at a banquet, and after I come back from my program, they'll say, I can't believe it. We just couldn't believe it. I said, how is this guy going to be funny? And you can learn it. It can be learned. I've read in books where humor specialists will say, we can't teach people to be funny. Some people have actually said that. And I think what they actually mean is they can't teach you to be a professional comedian. But everybody can be a little bit better than they are right now. One of the keys, let me tell you how I did it. And I think it's a very good way to develop your sense of humor, and that is to be a volunteer at work. I was in a work group. At this point, I had done no humor in my life, no presentations or programs. I was doing magic, but no comedy with the magic. And within this work group, within any work group, you're always doing going-aways, skits, roasts, parties, retirements, and they always need someone to do that. Well, there were two people within my work group who were extremely funny. And I teamed up with them. And just like they write sitcoms in Hollywood, they use teams normally of two people. I teamed up with them, and for 3 years we wrote skits, we made movies, we made Mr. Bill films. Mr. Bill Goes to Work at our office. We played with that, and I learned the humor business by working and also contributing to the morale and the esprit of the group by having fun parties and going-aways. That's a good way that you can do it, is to volunteer, work with someone who has a great sense of humor. I'm going to cover some of the basic principles of humor. Surprise, tension, pauses, relationships. And then I'm also going to cover some important tips for spontaneous humor, how to use and develop spontaneous humor, and then I'll close with some very specific delivery tips that will be of value to you, I hope. Surprise is one of the basic principles in humor. It's said that a setup for a joke is a train coming down the tracks. Think of it as your train of thought. and it comes down the tracks, and when it derails, that's the joke. It's something that you weren't expecting someone to eat cat food. And there's a certain emotional reaction there when that happens, and it might be laughter, it might be something else. Okay? But because surprise is so critical, that's why when you construct your humor, you always want the punch word and the punch line at the end of the joke. The punch line at the end, the punch word is normally the last word in the punch line. So if you make a manuscript and write your jokes out, highlight the punch words. Say, what is the word that should trigger the laugh? Circle it or highlight it with a marker so you know where it is. That tells you where you need to put emphasis. Maybe you want to link a gesture to each punch word. If you do, it adds emphasis to it, and it also helps you remember the punch word because you have a specific, maybe the gesture is something like where you're going down and bending your knees, and that's the gesture for that punch word. It helps you remember it. It adds more impact, but you can't do that unless you know where the punch word is, and the punch word needs to be at the end. That's also the reason that you don't want to telegraph your humor, and telegraphing your humor is to say, this is a really funny story. You're not going to believe this. Well, that's like challenging people almost, and it tells them the humor's coming, and it's better if it's a surprise. So it's better not to telegraph your humor. You need to do your homework. And part of that is the pre-programmed questionnaire. If you do your pre-programmed questionnaire and find out about the group, the idiosyncrasies of the group, the funny things that are happening, and you include some of that in your talk, it's a surprise to the people because you know that information. They didn't know that you knew that President so-and-so of the company hit 15 golf balls in the lake last weekend at the tournament. And they knew that. So it comes as a surprise when you've done your homework and you incorporate that. And lastly, because humor is a surprise, you never need to apologize for a joke that doesn't work. If it doesn't work, you turn your surprise into your secret. If the joke doesn't work, you pretend you were serious. Who's to know? Who's to know? I'm serious. If a joke doesn't work, and sometimes people will explain it or apologize, but just press on. The second basic principle is tension. And tension is a very basic principle. We laugh to release tension. So if we can build tension, it will build a situation where laughter will relieve that tension. A form of tension is boredom. And it's said that children laugh a lot when they're young because they're bored to death. If you watch little children, and they probably are bored, they don't have anything to do, and you'll see them laughing, not at anything in particular, they'll just be laughing. They'll just be playing and they'll just be laughing. They're bored, they're killing time, and they're bored. It's stress, and laughter relieves the tension. Another theory is that if you're embarrassed, something happens that embarrasses you, you might laugh. Well, there's tension, you're relieving the tension through laughter. It's also said that blue humor, so when people do sexual jokes, for example, in a nightclub especially, you hear lots of sexual jokes. People laugh because they're uncomfortable with it. So that's the theory, tension and release of tension. Now the question is, well, is that a good idea then to put blue humor into your talk? Because John Kinde said to do it. Better not to do it at all. And in fact, the rule is, when in doubt, leave it out. And you'll never regret having made that choice. I can't count the number of times I've put something in, sort of questioned whether or not I should do it, and afterwards I wished I hadn't put it in the talk. And you learn the hard way sometimes, but when in doubt, leave it out. And I call sexual humor a comedy cop-out. It's easy, isn't it? 4-letter words and sex jokes. It's a cheap way to get a joke. And there are much, much better ways. So the pause ties in directly with tension, because the pause is a form of anticipation. And when you pause just before a punch word, it's setting up a certain amount of anticipation that the punch word is coming, and it will have more of an impact because of the pause. A good example of how emotions are released with tension. I was watching a bowling tournament. It wasn't a tournament, it was a league. It was just a regular league night. And there were about 100 people in the bowling alley, and one of the bowlers had bowled 9 strikes in a row. 9 strikes. Well, that meant that if he was to bowl 3 more strikes, he'd have a perfect game. So people started to gather around. And he got up there in the 10th frame to roll the first ball, and he positioned himself, and he made his approach, released the ball, and the ball went down, and he got a strike. And everybody erupted in applause, and they were cheering, and they were applauding. And then he walked over. As soon as he bent over and touched his ball, the room fell silent. He picked up the ball, and he got ready for the approach, made the approach, released the ball. You could hear it rolling because it was silent in the room. Strike! And the place erupted. Release of emotion. Tension, tension, tension. Release of emotion. A good illustration. He needed one more strike. As soon as he walked over and touched that ball, the room fell silent. He picked up the ball, made his approach, rolled the ball, down, strike. 300 game, perfect game. First time most people had seen it. People were elbowing each other, slapping each other on the back, laughing and cheering and applauding. A perfect illustration of tension with release of emotion and feeling. And that's what happens with humor as well. The pause helps build that anticipation. The pause helps focus attention to the punchline so people will hear the punchline. The pause also helps focus attention to what you're doing. Because when you pause, they look at your expression on your face. Jack Benny, there was a special on television 2 nights ago. And he is the master of the pause. Johnny Carson's pretty good at it too. They both do almost the same thing. You ever seen Jack Benny? He puts his hand by his cheek, and he turns his head. He just pauses, and that draws attention to the physical action of what he's doing. So if you're going to do, it's called a take. You do a joke, and a take is a physical reaction to the joke. It might be an expression, might be what they call mugging, or looking off to the side. The pause draws attention to that. The pause also lets people laugh. As beginning speakers, people are afraid. They'll do a joke, and all of a sudden, people aren't laughing. It's only been a half a second. But it seems like it's been 5 seconds. And so you start talking again, and that signals them that there's no joke there. You need to pause. I had a friend 15 years ago, and she said, "I figured out why you're so funny. You insist that we laugh." And I thought, well, I think what she means is, you know what's funny, you'll deliver the line, and you'll wait. And usually the laughs will come, but sometimes it takes a little bit of patience and a little bit of courage to wait for the laughs. And then the pause also comes in humor, because once they start laughing, you need to pause and let them laugh. Because if you cut them off, if you start talking again, it's like saying, "Oh, be quiet, I want to talk. I don't want you to be laughing." So you need to wait till they start laughing, and you need to not step on your laughs. You need to pause and let them laugh. I'm going to share a couple of specific examples on how comedians have used pause and tension in their routines to get laughs. The first is Sid Lorraine. He's referred to as the Dean of Canadian Magicians. He was working at the Riviera Hotel in Las Vegas, and he was doing a pitchman act, which was selling patent medicine, snake oil, from the stage. And he was doing this routine, and as he was talking, his voice started to go bad. It started to crack. And the longer he went, the worse his voice got. And he started to apologize, and you started to feel really sorry for him. He was in his 80s. So you feel sorry for an older man that's having problems with his voice. And then he took a drink of his medicine. And he started talking 65 miles an hour again. The medicine cured the bad voice. And what he did, he pulled us in. He built that tension. You felt like saying, "Give the poor man a glass of water." And it just brought the house down. And it took people by surprise. He built the tension and broke the tension and got his laughter. An example in a program that I presented. I did a program down in Alabama, and it was for a military group, and there was a fellow, he was a general. His name was Frank Willis. I don't normally call generals fellows, but yeah, his name was Frank Willis, Brigadier General Frank Willis. And he was new in this organization, so the people didn't know him, and this is sort of a welcoming party. It was the first party he had been to. And I was doing something in the form of Carnax. You've seen Johnny Carson, he holds the envelope to his head. Steve Allen also did it in the format of Answer Man. And you give the answer, and then you open the envelope and read the question. Well, as it is with a lot of humor, you need to do the setup first. So I did one Karnak to set up my joke. The answer is Oscar Mayer, ballpark, and a fighter pilot. Oscar Mayer, ballpark, and a fighter pilot. The question is, name 3 hot dogs. Now, for a military group, that joke is about a 7.5 or an 8. Fighter pilots are considered hot dogs and show-offs. They're really cocky people because they're really hot stuff. They fly fighter planes. My next one. Oscar Mayer, ballpark, and General Willis. Oscar Mayer, ballpark, and General Willis. You could hear a gasp in the room. An audible gasp. And people were thinking, oh, he's going to call the General a hot dog. You could just feel that. I opened the envelope, and the question is, name 3 Franks. General Frank Willis was his first name. So I'm going to talk about relationships in a bit. I connected the relationships. I used the setup. I built the pause in there, the anticipation, the tension. He's going to call the General a hot dog. And you pause, name 3 Franks. And it got a great response, and that joke was a 10. An example. Pause, tension, humor. The next basic principle is relationships. You saw the relationship there, hot dogs and Franks. You're tying together things that are normally unrelated to find the humor. The old classic, slip on the banana peel, shows us the basic principles. You slip on the banana peel, surprised, you weren't expecting that, huh? Tension. If you see someone fall, it startles you. In fact, sometimes you even shake a little bit after seeing an accident. Relationships, does it look right for someone to be sitting on the ground? Someone wearing a suit and a tie to be sitting on the ground? Relationships, huh? It slip on the banana peel illustrates the basic things of surprise, tension, relationships. People ask me who my favorite humorist is. And it's Bob Murphy from Nacogdoches, Texas. And he is known for finding relationships, for making observational humor at the beginning of a meeting, and his opening remark will very often tie in with an original joke. And I heard him speak at a conference, and it was a conference where 2 things had happened. Number 1, the service was slow. Extremely slow. They served the salads, and they waited, and they waited, and they waited, and they served the soup, and they waited, and they waited, and they waited, and they served the chicken. And then they showed a multimedia slide movie show. If you've been to a convention, you've seen these shows where they bring it in from the Chamber of Commerce to advertise next year's convention. You want to come to Washington, D.C., because here's how great of a city it is. And in 60 seconds, they showed the history of the United States. 3 screens, and it was boomity, 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 boom, and music, and it was just went really slick presentation. Bob Murphy got up there to speak after dinner and after that presentation. He said, before I say anything humorous tonight, I just want to say that I wished that the fellow that made the film had served the supper. Now, the thing with spontaneous humor oftentimes is you had to be there. Lots of times something will happen, or you'll say something, if you relate it to someone else, it's never as funny. What's important to remember, when it's spontaneous, on the spot, you are there. And a joke that's a 6 or a 7 anywhere else will be a 9 or a 10 when it's on the spot. That line got 30 seconds of laughter and applause. They laughed and they laughed and they laughed until he said, oh, be quiet, I don't have but 10 minutes. They would have laughed longer than 30 seconds. 30 seconds of laughter. Spontaneous humor and relationships. So I want to go through the process of developing a humorous talk, and we will look at what I did with the cat food, with the food and the sex relationships. What I start by creating a shopping list. I call it a shopping list. And what I want to do is I want to list everything related to the categories that I can think of. So I started out, I have food and I have sex. Name some things related to food. Name some things.
Cake.
Cake, restaurants. Cooks, dishes. Shopping, okay? And you can branch out. You've got restaurants, so think of all the things in restaurants. Type of restaurants, busboys, waitresses, cakes, parties, birthday parties, shopping, grocery stores, convenience marts, fast food stores. You see how you can branch out? You'll have your shopping list and look for opportunities to branch out, which gives you more items. And then I've got the other side, sex. Name some things related to sex. Marriage. Saul can't think of any. Fun. Okay, fun. And same process. And you come up with a list. And you can see from how I constructed the speech, I took things on the food side and I looked for some kind of a relationship, because the basic premise is those are both natural and good things, but we have certain hang-ups, and that's not to say that that's good or bad. That's just the way it is. It's just the way we feel certain ways about the two different categories. And I compared and I looked for relationships and built the talk from there. Can you see how that would work? It's a lengthy process. You don't stand up here even in 45 minutes and develop a talk like that. It takes some time, but that's the process. So step number 1 is that you brainstorm. You do your shopping list and brainstorm. Step number 2 for me, this is what works for me, I organize the talk. I have all these ideas. I now have to write down an organization, because without the organization it doesn't fit together. It doesn't make sense. It isn't a speech or a talk. And I'm not suggesting as I do this that you all are even interested in doing a 7-minute talk, but the process is the same if you want to put 1 or 2 jokes into a sales presentation, if you want to come up with something original, which I think is much better than finding a joke in a joke book. You go through the process of looking for relationships and coming up with something that's fresh. Brainstorm, organize. I write out the speech, and I keep in mind that brevity is one of the keys to humor. The shortest distance between the setup and the punchline works best. If it's too long, there's a saying in comedy, if your setup is too long, the punchline is carrying too much baggage. If the setup is too long, the punchline better be extremely funny. Because if it's mildly funny, you've wasted a lot of time. And the last step, I then write my opening and my closing. So if I were to try to write a 7-minute humorous speech, I would not sit down and say, well, how am I going to start this? That's the last thing I do. And the intro and the closing come fairly easily once you've got everything else developed. And that's my process. Let me give you 2 more examples. And I'll just give you segments from a couple of other speeches that I wrote specifically for the purpose of humor. When you do humor, you often need a seed to get it started. And by a seed, it might be something that someone says. And I was at a meeting one time, and somebody said, well, we have an alcohol problem in this country, and maybe what we need is a sin tax. And I thought, I can do something with that. So I made my shopping list, everything relating to sin that I could think of. I went through the dictionary. I went through thesaurus and synonym finders, and I found everything that I could that was related to sin. Things that sounded like sin and synagogue and cinnamon, and I just made a whole big list. And I found that I had a visual aid, and I could turn the word sin into the word fun by moving 2 lines, like moving sticks. And so in the opening it was, let me define sin for you. And I moved 2 lines and I said fun. If it's fun, it's a sin. And so it was sort of tongue-in-cheek. And then I went into the routine from there by having an organizational pattern. And it was something like, I'll do just part of it, just so you can see how it fell together. We're concerned about sin in our country, aren't we? I certainly am. And I'm an expert on the subject of sin. In fact, when I was in college, I wrote my thesis on that subject. My sin thesis. My colleague in helping me write that report was Cynthia Sinclair from Cincinnati. Now, we were not trying to be sensational, but we're making a sincere attempt to analyze the nature of and the consequences of sin. There are 4 major categories to sins that you can see. The visible sins that you can see, the 4 see sins. One of those happens to be sins which are for the birds, commonly known as cardinal sins. And we're concerned about the sins expended, all the energy expended in sinning, called synergy. And we need to do something about it. We need to eliminate all synonyms. Did you know that the Air Force is training navigators to use sextants? And they're using your tax dollars. And let's face it, we have a Social Security tax, we have an income tax. Yes, we need a sin tax. Doesn't have to be a lot. My mother used to say, if I had a nickel for every time you left your clothes on the floor, I'd be a millionaire. Nickels add up. So we recommend a sin-nickel sin tax. Just gives you an idea. That was a 7-minute routine, but that's just, you pull the things out. I organized it into the 4 categories of sins, the 4 consequences of sins, and what we do about it. There was some logical organization to it, and that was the process of that. I had another seed that someone gave me, and they said, boy, I paid an arm and a leg for that. And I thought, oh, I think I can do something with that. We're not only concerned with sin in our country, we're concerned with our finances, aren't we? Growing older and what we're doing with our money, but the future, your future financial security will not be based in terms of money. Banks are failing everywhere, aren't they? But every day a new organ bank opens. Your future wealth will be based not on money, but on body parts. Oh, you won't see a woman walking down the street wearing her mink coat. She'll be wearing her coat of arms. And you'll see 2 people shopping for a car, and one will say, oh, I bet you paid an eye tooth for that beauty. No, actually, it cost me an arm and a leg. Did it take a big down payment? Oh, no. I put my foot down. Say, I would like to buy a newspaper, but I'm broke. Could you lend me an ear? No, I tell you, I'm fresh out, but I do have half a mind to buy a paper. Let's see if the cashier can change my mind. And someday a politician will be arrested for dealing in illegal arms. And a financial advisor will be accused of insider trading. And if you travel by bus, you'll need a small token, maybe like a thumb, which will add a new dimension to the word thumbing a ride. Or if you're making a phone call, you'll need something small like a toe. Plus, of course, you're calling a toll-free number. If you go to the restaurant and the waitress gives you some bad service, well, for a tip, you just give her some lip. Or give her a piece of your mind. If you have a bad investment, you could lose your mind after having paid through the nose. Yes. And it'll add a new dimension when you roll over next to your loved one and you say, my dear, you look like $1 million. Thank you. So that's an example of taking a seed, making the list, pay through the nose, arm and a leg, paid an eye tooth, and you develop that. In fact, if you do really well at work, you might get a raise. If you do really well at work, the boss might even give you a hand. Of course, the IRS will want a piece of the action. You wouldn't want to give them your whole raise. You wouldn't give the IRS a hand. You just want to give them the finger. Okay. Body parts. Again, it's not that you would want to use that material except for maybe in a contest or in a comedy club, but the process. The process is the same for coming up with one piece of humor to use. It's the relationships, studying the relationships, and forming the humor. And it comes with practice, and it comes with experience. And when you're developing your humor, you'll say, well, I might need to lie. If I tell this story and I'm brainstorming, maybe I'll tell something that is a lie. No, you're never lying. You're just stretching the truth. Depends upon how you look at it. And besides, as long as you're not trying to mislead people. If it's in fun, for laughs, then it's okay to stretch the truth. and have some imagination. So as you collect your ideas, you need to write them down. I can't remember jokes, so I don't write it down. Or if you're in a car, I carry a memory, a cassette recorder, a micro cassette recorder. I figure I have power steering, I have power brakes. It's my power memory. You've got to have one of those in your car. And you might use a memory link technique if you're sitting in a conference and you hear a couple of things, or a couple of things come to mind that you think you can use. You need to link them together. There's a book by Harry Lorraine called The Memory Book. There are other books out there. You can use a memory link technique to link together, and I do that. Sometimes I've linked 5 and 6 jokes together through a linking technique, and then when I get out I can remember every one of them, and I write them down and put them into my file. One of the very keys of humor, though, is using spontaneous humor. And I'll give you the 4 keys of using spontaneous humor. And key number 1 is preparation. You prepare to be spontaneous. Sounds a little funny sometimes, but if you think about it, how many people have been to a comedy club? I'm guessing maybe half the people here. About a third of the people. Maybe you've seen it on television if you haven't actually been to a club. And if you've been there, you've seen how the comedians will react with the people in the audience. If I'm talking to Jerry in the front row here and I find out he's a cab driver and I have a joke for a cab driver, and I'm ad-libbing for the 50th time, because I used that last week also, and 5 days before that, they prepare and they use the same things. You use savors when you speak. If you go and you speak, you might have something for, what if you get terrible feedback on the microphone system? You say, microphone system by Ronco. Or the lights go out. You might say, next slide, please. Or I thought we paid our electric bill. You can find some things that work for you that you feel comfortable with. They call them savors. There's another thing that's also a branch of savors, and I call them bomb lines. If you do a joke that doesn't work, sometimes people will use a line like, that's the last time I'll take a joke from Patsy. Or it would be the president of the organization that was there sitting at the head table. Just someone that you could lightly focus some humor on. Called a savor. So if you're prepared, preparation to be spontaneous. It appears spontaneous, but a lot of it is involved in preparation. And again, back to the questionnaire. If you have a questionnaire and you found information about the group, there's a sense of spontaneity, because they didn't expect that you would normally have that. It wouldn't normally be part of your routine. It feels spontaneous. Pre-programmed questionnaire. Step number 2 is observation. This is one of the very keys to using spontaneous humor. I'm going to give you some examples from my talks that have worked really well. When you arrive, you just pay attention to what's happening, and you look for relationships. I did a program for school. It was in a big multi-purpose building. And in the back, over the back door, there were 2 signs, one above the other. The signs were not related. They just happened to have been posted, one over the other. And the signs said, as I talked to the group, I said, this is a very unusual facility. I noticed over the back door, the sign says, restrooms, capacity, 375. And I said, I guess that means there's no waiting. I saw something a little bit differently than other people had seen. It was a strong joke. They saw it. They said, yeah, those signs are there. We never thought of it that way before. And it got a great response. Observation. I was doing a talk at a civic club, and they were having recognition of members. And if you've been at a recognition night, sometimes people are there and sometimes they're not. But they will recognize them anyway. Joe Blow for raising funds, and they'll all applaud, even though he's not there. And they gave things away for fundraising, and for membership raising, and for perfect attendance, and for this and for that. Lots of awards. I got up there, and as part of my opening remarks, I said, this is my kind of club. You gave out 2 perfect attendance awards to people who weren't even here. And when they gave them out, they didn't realize that there was some humor in that. They were giving away perfect attendance awards to people who were absent. And it was an obvious funny line for the group. Observational humor. I was at another program, and it was a Christmas program, and I found that in discussing with the people, they were proud of the regular things that they used to do, their traditions. Yeah, they had Santa Claus. Every year they had a Santa Claus. And every year everybody got a Polaroid picture with Santa Claus. And when I went up there, I had noticed, as I was sitting having dinner, that there was a man seated near me who was wearing loud plaid pants, red and green plaid pants, and a black sport coat. And I thought I'd take a chance. And as I went to the stage, I took his hand and I said, "Would you join me on stage?" And we went up to the stage, and there were about 150 people there. And I said, and he was wearing a name tag, and I said, "You all know Bob." I said, "Bob has started a new tradition here today. Next year, when you come to your Christmas party, you'll be required to exchange an article of clothing with someone seated near you. Would the gentleman wearing the other half of Bob's suit please stand up?" And there was a fellow just 3 or 4 seats away from where Bob was, and all I did was, I hadn't coordinated it at all. I just gestured toward him, and the guy with the plaid jacket stood up. And he had plaid jacket and black pants. He was just mirror opposite of the other guy. And it looked like one guy maybe had a plaid suit and one guy had a black suit, and they just traded an article of clothing. It appeared that way. And that joke was a 10. It involved, you want to involve your audience with humor. You want it to be fresh. It was spontaneous. You had to be there, and for them, that joke was a 10. I was listening to presentations at another workshop presentation, and they were making awards right before a luncheon. They were making service awards for people who had been in the company 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, 20 years. And I noticed a running theme. They would give award to Fred, and they'd say, "Oh, and he started out in the telemarketing department, and then went here and here and here." And then Sally would come up there, and they'd say, "Oh, and she started out in the telemarketing department too." And so came up there, "Oh, and yeah, she started in the telemarketing department too." So I got up there to do my program, which was about a half an hour later, which makes the joke even stronger because it's not telegraphed as much as it is right now. You couldn't see the joke coming. I did my normal opening lines. People refer to me as a comedy magician because they laugh at my magic and they're mystified by my jokes. I wasn't always a magician. I used to work in telemarketing. And it was a perfect joke, and they knew that I had picked that up from the context of the meeting, and they appreciate the freshness of it. I did a program at the Unocal conference room down Los Angeles, and this was shortly after the Exxon Valdez oil spill. Fresh in the news. And I noticed, I always look around the room, and I noticed that the walls, it was like a boardroom, it was a conference room with a big table down the middle and chairs all around the side. And it was not an oil group, it was another group that had rented this conference room. And I noticed that the walls were decorated with nature pictures, and there were pictures of dolphins and waves and sailboats and all kinds of beautiful pictures. And I opened my talk. I said, "This is really ironic. Here we are in Unical's conference room, and the walls are decorated with pictures of Exxon's oil storage facilities." And that joke played as a 10 because they knew that it wasn't part of a canned speech. It was fresh, had to do with the room. It played very, very strongly. I'll give you 2 examples with the cat food that I did. I was speaking in Atlanta. In fact, it was at a regional conference, and there were 350 people there. And 2 things happened during that conference. The first thing that happened was the waiters came in with the soup, and since it was in Atlanta, that's the peach tree state. It's peach everything in Atlanta. They served us cold peach soup. Gave everybody the soup. A lot of people tried a little bit of it. They took back full bowls of peach soup. Not very many people finished their peach soup. And then the waiters brought in the prime rib and the chicken, and they dropped 3 big trays of stacked meals, one at a time. It was crash, clatter, clatter, clatter. You couldn't help but notice it, especially when the second tray went, and then the third tray went. Well, I noticed those things. And sometimes people will say, "Well, if you have a set talk, you wouldn't want to deviate." I will deviate any time in a talk to put spontaneous humor in it. So here I had a set talk in a contest situation even, and I'm doing cat food helper. And I do the line at the end, and I say, well, I took the label off a can of cat food and put it on a can of dog food, because cat food tastes terrible. I said, well, actually, let me tell you the truth. I said, this is really a can of roast beef hash with a cat food label on it. That's what it is. It's potatoes and beef. And this is really whipped cream inside of a carpet cleaner label. And this is really Pam cooking oil inside of a Pine Sol disinfectant spray label. But to tell you the truth, room temperature roast beef hash with whipped cream on it doesn't taste all that good. But it tasted pretty good compared to the soup. And that line got 28 seconds of laughs. They laughed, and they laughed, and they laughed, and they laughed, because it was on target. And that was the funniest line of the entire evening, and there were 9 other speakers. That line got the biggest laugh. The second biggest laugh came from the other spontaneous remark. And I said, look, carpet cleaner, just another non-dairy topping. I said, well, there's an advantage to using carpet cleaner on your food. Take this fine hotel where the waiters drop 10% of the food on the floor. It doesn't make the floor dirty, it cleans it. And that got applause and whistles. Laughter and applause and whistles. So that's the strength of spontaneous humor and having the courage to do it. The courage to do it. And that's step number 3, is the courage. Using spontaneous humor takes guts. If you're going up on stage in front of 150 strangers and they're paying you money to entertain them, and you take a man up there wearing plaid pants, you're taking a risk. But it's the same risk anywhere else. You could be at a civic club trying a little piece of humor, and the more offbeat it is, the more butterflies you're going to feel. I'll feel really uncomfortable if I'm doing something extremely offbeat sometimes. But you have to have the courage to do it and to try it, and by doing it and falling off your bicycle, you'll learn how to do it better. You've got to have the courage. Step 3. And step 4, of course, is practice. You've got to do it and practice and practice. I'm going to give you 2 tips to practice in putting more spontaneous humor into your talks. Very solid tips. Number 1, always put at least one piece of humor in every talk you do. That gives you the discipline of trying some humor every time you speak. Someone says, well, some places it's inappropriate to do humor. I'm hard-pressed to find a place where it's inappropriate to do humor. Maybe giving a briefing to a 4-star general representing a military unit, it might be inappropriate to use a lot of humor. But sometimes even it's appropriate there. But sometimes, how about at a funeral? Is that appropriate when people are so sad? Oh, you bet. Humor's appropriate. A lot of places we think it might not be. It really is. So put some humor into your presentations. And tip number 2, and this is a strong item, and I've seen people grow with this. If you belong to any kind of a group where you can speak at the end of the meeting, whether it's a civic club or a Toastmasters club or a church or a PTA meeting, you give yourself the challenge of coming up with at least one piece of observational humor by the end of the meeting, and you will include that in your closing comments. It'll seem hard when you start, but I've gotten to the point, and you can talk to some people in this room, I've gotten to the point where at the end of a 2-hour meeting, I can come up with as many as 15 pieces of observational humor from a meeting. And then what you do, if you have 15, you just sort of weed them out and pick out the best 7 or 9 or 10 or the best 3. But you start finding humor, and it also spreads into the rest of your life. You start seeing humor in life by doing that. So that's the way to practice. And if you have an assignment of telling a joke at the end of the meeting to lighten it up, your responsibility, you bring a hip pocket joke just in case. But you create your own joke. Don't come and read a joke from a joke book or one you heard. You create your own joke. That is one of the strongest tips for using spontaneous humor that I can give you. And you can develop it. It won't happen overnight, but slowly over a period of a year or 2 years, it'll work. And I've seen it work with people. I've seen it work in the last 2 or 3 years where people have made great progress. Very briefly, I'm going to close here with some delivery tips before we take some questions. Delivery tips. Number one, I recommend that you visit a comedy club or watch comedy on TV. Watch their technique, watch their gestures, watch their movement, how they look, how they pause. And the second half of that tip with comedy clubs, if you have the nerve, go to an open mic. I know we have one person in this room that's done some work in comedy clubs, and I think he's worked professionally as well as open mic. And it's great practice. I have done over 24 sets of open mic in comedy clubs. It's a challenge to stand up in front of drunk people who are expecting you to be funny. And it stretches you. And someday I'm going to take Patsy Dooley to a comedy club with me, and she's going to do her ski speech in front of a room full of drunk people. And we'll see how it goes. But it's a challenge and it's a stretch. When you come to a punch word, one technique that some comics use is to elongate the vowel sounds to accentuate the punch word. When they're born, they're pink. When they're hot, they're red. When they're cold, they're white. And when they're dead, they're blue. Different accent on the vowel sound. Orange scramblers, take all you want. God's watching the orange juice. You accent the vowel sounds and elongate the vowel sounds of the punch word. It adds more music. It adds more music to the presentation. So give it a try. Elongate the vowel sounds. You can use angularity of movement, the power of angularity. And that is, when you say something that's funny, rather than just standing there, you might cock your head, you might move a knee, you might cock an elbow. A lot of comedians will use the power of angularity to add emphasis to the punchline. Think about your punch words and what you're doing, and if you can put some angularity in your presentation. And then as you deliver your punchline, this is one important tip. Pick a person to deliver that line to. Don't deliver the punchline to 6 people. Pick one person and deliver that punchline, the entire punchline, to one person. And then wait 3 seconds into the laughs before you move on. That's called landing the humor, or in serious speaking, it's a tip for serious speaking. If you're going to make a point, land the point. Let it sit. Rather than make a critical point and then break it off. Land the point. Land the humor. Wait about 3 seconds. People will start laughing. When you feel the laughter is starting to die down, pan the audience with eye contact. That helps draw out just a little bit more laughter. It's a technique that comics will use. Land it, stay with, freeze. When the laughter starts to die, pan the audience. And one of the safest things to do when you have some new humor and some fresh humor is to put it in the middle of your talk. It's always the safest thing to do until you gain some more confidence. I wouldn't necessarily recommend grabbing a man with plaid pants to open your talk, unless you really feel good about it. But practice with humor in the middle of your talk. And then your whole talk goes well. The stuff that you tried at the beginning and at the end works fine, and you put it all together. So when you use the basics, surprise, tension, pauses, relationships, understand the basics, understand shopping list, putting the relationships together, organizing, delivering, practice, spontaneous humor, preparation, observation, courage, and practice. The only way you'll learn is by doing it. So I wish you the best of luck, and I wish you lots of laughs.